crop in 1790s for the United States. Americans realized that cotton could be grown in the southern states and then be sold to the British, who had developed a machine to turn cotton into thread. The only problem for the southern farmers was that cotton took such a long time to clean. It took a whole day for a person to remove the seeds of 1 pound of cotton. Later on, a guy by the name of Eli Whitney had invented a machine called the cotton engine or cotton gin. This machine would allow a total of 50 pounds of cotton to get cleaned by one slave per day. After such a small period of time, cotton became the main cash crop of the United States. Many farmers started to buy large farms called plantations in the southern states. These large farms were taken care of by many slaves. At the time, slaves were a good way for farmers to get cheap labor and make lots of profit. The problem began as the demand of cotton kept on growing, but the space was limited at the time. This led the US government to do as much as they could to obtain more land. Cotton contributed directly to the growth of the United States, but along the way it made many people suffer and at the same time blinded people for a couple of cents. During the 1800s, the cotton was in the process of becoming the main cash crop in the US. There was many African American people being kidnapped and brought to the United States as slaves. Their trip would last from 8 to 12 weeks. They had limited food and water to survive from and were packed densely in large boats. These were in such bad conditions that many of them committed suicide. The only purpose of bringing so many slaves was to fulfill the demand for cotton crops that was increasingly rising. Of course, all these slaves were looking for farmers to make huge profits and help the economy of the United States. Therefore, Americans began having ideas to expand to nearby areas where cotton could grow efficiently. This plan seemed to be excellent until they encountered a problem: the Native Americans. They were initially living there in the United States before the Europeans migrated to the United States. The US government asked the Native Americans to move elsewhere since they were standing in good soil land. As a result, many of them moved kindly, but others refused to move. The refusal of the Native Americans was an issue to the Americans as they were not able to rapidly grow crops. For that reason, the government took action by creating a systematic extinction plan against them, known as the genocide. During this event, the US government advertised how supposedly the Indians were murdering Americans and attacks towards the Native Americans should be done. The government decided that since they were not cooperating with the government, the Indians should be removed by any means. They called this act the Indian Removal Act. This would allow the government to send the Indians to reservation camps on the west of the Mississippi River. This way, the US could gain land in an easy way. As years came by, the US kept on expanding to the west. A very important part that was key for the expansion of the United States was the Louisiana Purchase. It all began when France owned all the Louisiana Territory. In New Orleans, Louisiana, there was a port that was used by the US to carry crops and be sent to farther states. Jefferson, who was President of the United States at the time, was worried that he would no longer be able to use this port. Therefore, Thomas Jefferson decided to plan on buying New Orleans from France. But soon after, the United States was told that they could no longer use the port. Jefferson was more worried now. He sent Monroe, one of his advisors, to Paris so that he would speed up the process on closing the deal on Louisiana. By 1802, Napoleon had too many wars going on, as he was trying to take over Europe and other small countries. His money was short, and he needed to pay debts caused by his wars. After Napoleon analyzed his situation, he finally decided to sell New Orleans and the rest of the Louisiana Territory to the United States. France only asked for $15 million for all the land. Finally, in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase was completed and became part of the United States. It made it possible for the US to double their land for only pennies per acre. This included all the land from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. The exploration that was made by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark in 1804 was an important contributor to expand further to the west of the United States. This trip throughout the Louisiana Territory helped the U.S. discover a new world. These two brave men traveled to an unknown land with only a few resources to explore it. Along the way, they found plants, animals, and tribes never seen before. The weather was very extreme and they only had so much food, but yet they did not stop nor let their country down. They made several connections with some tribes that were generous enough to give them shelter while they were there. As a result of this incredible exploration, Lewis and Clark were able to design a map of the new territory as well as annotations of new species and plants discovered. The United States were now able. Before the United States got the size it is today, they had to bend a sum of events to make it possible. It began when Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna became president of Mexico. That was not all. He became a dictator and had full control of the Mexican army. Since he was a military colonel, he wanted to become the next Napoleon of the Americas. As time passed by, many Americans took advantage of the good soil in Texas and moved there to make profits. This was beneficial to Santa Anna because it meant more money coming into his empire. The Americans living in Texas only had to follow the rules, which meant no slavery, and pay taxes. Of course, they did not like this because it decreased the profits since they had to pay people to work. They planned to become an independent country so they would not have to follow any rules. Santa Anna was not happy with this, so he took an army to the Alamo where the Texans were settled. Of course, the Texans were outnumbered and defeated. Unfortunately, for the Mexican army, the Texans had already sent a letter asking the United States for help. After a couple days of the battle in the Alamo, the U.S. small army was able to defeat the Mexican army in only 18 minutes of fight. Santa Anna had no choice but to buy his freedom out, so he made a treaty to give away Texas, Nevada, Arizona, California, New Mexico, and part of Utah to the United States. Santa Anna was indeed corrupt and was greedy enough to keep all the money and make the Mexican people suffer the consequences of his